All right, guys, so here's the second lab that we're going to have you do. This one is the recrystallization of acetylsalicylic acid, basically aspirin, to get acetylsalicylic acid. I've already gotten it started. What I did was took 10 aspirin tablets and ground them up with a mortar and a pestle. And then I took the mass of them, just so we have that written down. The mass of our 10 aspirin tablets was 3.46 grams. So again, the mass of the 10 aspirin tablets is 3.46 grams. Then what I've done is I placed the tablets. It said to put them in an Erlenmeyer flask. I actually put them in a round bottom flask. That's okay, that works perfectly fine, okay? And I dissolved the aspirin, the powdered aspirin then, in 95% ethanol ethyl alcohol, okay? Also in there, you can't really see it, there's a little stirring bar. I also have to put in here one boiling stone, they call it. It's probably pretty hard to see there. It's a little round piece of glass. Comes in this giant thing here. I'm just going to drop it in there, hopefully. You can see that. So there's our boiling chips. Okay, now I'm going to lower this down. So it's resting in there. I'm going to start the stirring. And then I'm going to start heating it. All right. So that's going to take place for a while here. I'm going to raise this up a bit. Maybe we can see down into that thing just a little bit better. You can see what that looks like. We can turn the stirrer up maybe a little higher. You can probably hear the stirrer going. It's hard to see in a round bottom flask like that. So that's going along as we do what we need to do. I have to leave this sit here and boil, or sit here until it boils. Okay, we're going to let this continue to swirl. Okay, I don't have to swirl it as it says in the directions, I should say, because I have that boiling thing in there. Once this is done, okay, the acetylsalicylic acid is going to be soluble in that ethanol, and then the stuff that is binding those tablets, of course, you guys know, a regular old aspirin tablet, okay? Most of that is just binder. We want to get rid of that stuff, okay? Once we've got this up to boiling, okay, then we're going to filter it through some fluted filter paper into a nice clean Erlenmeyer flask. We're going to do some gravity filtration. And in the long run, the main thing that we're learning here is how to do a recrystallization, okay? So that's gotta go for a little bit. I'm going to get my filter ready, and I'm going to also get a funnel and a 125 milliliter Erlenmeyer flask. So that's going to go. All right. So that's going all right. There's my 125 milliliter Erlenmeyer flask. I've got my filters here. And I should say my funnel is there. The filters, let me have to go up in the, I think I have some here somewhere. Here we go. Here we go. So there's a bunch of different ways that we deal with filters. This particular one, I'm going to flute it. In other words, I'm going to fold it in half, fold it in half again, fold it in half again, fold it in half again, many times as you can. I could maybe do once more, but it's probably not going to give good crease there. That's okay. Okay, this is only one of a couple different ways you can use filter paper like this. The reason we do this, it increases the surface area of the filter paper, allows the liquid to go through faster. So there's my fluted filter paper. This is going to fit right in there like this. There's a little trick for you. Take some distilled water, get the filter paper wet, okay? It helps it sort of sink down into that funnel and sort of stick there. Now, the one thing we do want to be careful, you can see at the top, okay, how the fluted is. I've got to make sure I don't over pour that thing and miss some of this stuff. So what we're doing is we're waiting for this thing to come to a boil. It's heating up, but it's got a little ways to go. Okay, and then we can go on to the next step. So that's going to take a few minutes. We'll let that go. While this is going, I'm going to set up our ice water bath. So take me a minute or two. So this is going to probably take about 5 minutes to come to a boil, just so you guys are aware of that. It's going to be going along. I'm going to go grab the ice that we need to do the ice water bath. All right, we are boiling now, so we're about at the point we're ready. I'm going to shut this off, let it cool down for a little bit, but I'm going to keep the stirrer going. So we're going to give it a couple more minutes. While that's going on, I have my ice ready. And I do need a little beaker for some cold water to go along with it. We'll let that cool for a minute. Still cooling. We have another minute or two here. I'm gonna lift this up out of there a little bit so it'll cool a little quicker and enable me to pour that stuff just a little bit sooner. I don't want to have to wait too long if I don't have to. All right. So I've got my cold water and I've got my ice here to make a little ice bath. That's easy enough. I can put that in here and jumping the gun a little bit, but it'll still work as it is. And throwing things in there. Still just boiling a little. Looks like everything dissolved that we wanted to, so I'm going to give it another minute or so. And I think it's about ready to be poured here, so hopefully I can pick it up with my fingers. Oh yeah, it's cooled down. Still warm, but not horribly. Oops, it's quite warm yet. Luckily, I have that thing to set it in. I am going to shut the stirrer off and slide this back a little way. We won't really need to be using any of this stuff today. So what I'm going to do next here is I want to pour this into this fluted filter paper we have here. And I have to be careful that I don't overflow any of this thing. I'm going to grab myself a paper towel because it is still a bit warm. My fingers are not quite as immune to the heat as they used to be when we did this stuff. So All right, we want to go a little slow. And you can see the stuff coming through. That actually did a pretty good job of getting most everything out of there. And I'm going to take this and rinse. A little trick here, you do this upside down, you can collect some of your lost product. And organic chem guys, when you're doing labs in college, that's all they care about. Did you end up with the proper amount? And it does cool it down a little more than we wanted, but it's still going to work just fine. I'm going to set that to the side, and we're going to let this filter through for a few minutes. Okay, so you can see that's just a gravity filtration. Works quite well. And the stuff that we end up with down here is going to be called the filtrate. That's that liquid. And then the stuff that we end up there, that's solid, is the other stuff. Okay. The stuff that's going to be left, by the way, in the filter paper is actually going to be that binder that we do not need. We're going to be able to discard that. Normally, if you're doing this in an organic chem lab, you would probably go ahead and dry it out overnight to get a mass of it, so you know exactly how much binder and how much acetylsalicylic acid you ended up with, but we're not worried about that here. We're only looking for the stuff, the filtrate at the bottom. It's still got a little ways to go. Give it another few minutes here. It's going pretty well. It'll take a little time, especially as stuff binds up on us. Hope you guys are having a good summer. It's been a strange one. One thing I don't like is that we haven't been in lab together, but we are going to do that during the school year, some way, shape, or form. I want to get everyone at least one lab in with this stuff. It's really important, I think. We have a second lab that I'm going to do later today to help people visualize what we're doing. That lab is my favorite one of all the ones that we do. That's the lab where we actually create biodiesel fuel from cooking oil. And that is a fun little lab to do. And in that lab, again, that's not this lab we're doing, but that's the next lab we'll do. We use this thing. This is called a separatory funnel. It is a pretty expensive piece of glassware. We actually have plastic ones we usually use for the students, but it works great, and we'll go through that here when we do the next lab. Just take a look where we're at. Still got another couple minutes as it goes through. Gotta give it a little time. All right, let's take another look. Still a little bit dripping. Sometimes we can hurry it along a little bit. One of the things we'll learn how to do eventually here with this is also how to do a vacuum filtration using a filter flask and our the setup that we have on the sink right now, the little spigot on the end. This only works so fast. There's still just a little bit in there. It's coming, but as you get that binder sort of taking up the room at the bottom of that filter flask, it gets harder for the stuff to go through. We do want to let it all go because you can still see there's stuff dissolved in there. There's a solute in there that we want to attempt to get at. So we got to give it the time that it needs. Beyond that, this is going pretty rapidly, so not so bad. We'll let it keep going. Still waiting here. Almost done. It was pretty clear, so there's not much left. Give it another minute or two. Sometimes hard to be patient when we're doing this stuff. Hopefully we're almost done there. I think we are ready. Yep, we're pretty much done there. I'm going to take this out of here. And you can see it's just sort of a sludgy white junk that's in there. That's the binder. We don't need that. I'm going to set that to the side. I'm actually going to leave it in the funnel. And put that right in here. Okay. Now in here is the stuff that we were looking for. Okay. I'm going to add 50 milliliters of cold water to this and then let it sit. We're supposed to let it sit for 10 minutes. And here's the deal with this. I'm not measuring out exactly because the amount of cold water, just so you're in the ballpark. I started off at about 50 on this. And you guys know, normally you would never use a beaker or Erlenmeyer flask to measure, but it's not important that you're exact, just so you have about, we're just trying to increase the volume of the stuff we have. I'm gonna set that to the side, keep it cold and let it sit there. So we got, I'll time this so it doesn't take too bloody long. Okay, so this just has to sit in that cold water bath. Then we're going to use a Buchner funnel to do a vacuum filtration, okay? This is said Buchner funnel. What's special about this is it takes a piece of filter paper that fits exactly in there, okay? Then you can see it's connected to a one-hole stopper, and that then is gonna go into our filtration flask. This goes on top here, okay? And you can see this thing here, okay? This is gonna connect to our sink here, and actually I have to switch this around. This goes on here because when I turn the water on, water comes out of here really fast. This is actually a vacuum. So I put that on there, and see when I put this on here and the water starts to flow here, it's gonna suck the liquid through and it dries it out quite nicely for what we wanna do, okay? So that's all we got. We got about 9 minutes left here, a little less than that. So just relax for a few minutes. I'll let this go. I have to wash my hands time and time and time again as this goes on. It's just a smart thing to do. So we continually keep our hands clean. And one other thing I have to do, I normally shouldn't have to do, is I actually am out of the correct size filter paper for this Buchner funnel. So I actually have to cut myself one from a normal piece of filter paper. Not that big of a deal. But we can figure this out. All right. So just to make this work really well, I'm going to trace this. You learn in kindergarten how to cut. And then it has to be slightly smaller, so I'm just going to cut this and just go a bit inside the line. We want this to really fit tightly in there. Okay, we don't want it to go up the side though. You got to cover all those little holes that's in that Buchner funnel. And then what's going to happen is once we turn that vacuum, that water on, we get that vacuum effect created. And it really does a good job of sucking the liquid out of there. And we have a nice clean filtration. We can get it as dry as we can. You're never going to get it perfectly dry just because you just can't do it, but it works. So is it too big? Touch too big, got to cut off just a little more. That's what I thought, but it's pretty good. Back out now. That's the hard part. Just a little bit more off this one edge, I think. Okay, I think that's good. So I'm going to get this in here. Get that pushed all the way, nice and tight. Same thing. I'm going to take a little distilled water to get this thing here. It should really seal well. You can see right now, very little water is going through. Here's what the cool part is. We do this right. And by the way, there's a little trick. Usually they don't slide on, the tubes don't slide onto these things that easily, but because it was already wet, it slid right away. I'm going to just show you. I'm going to put a bunch of distilled water in here. And from gravity, some's coming through, you know. But watch what happens when I turn the sink on. And I like to always, before I even try to filter my stuff, do a rough run like this to make sure that piece of filter paper is nice and tight. But one problem with these jets is you sort of throw water up everywhere when you do this thing. And this thing will go long enough and it really truly dries this whole thing out. And that works quite nicely. And you can see pretty much all the water is drained. All right, we're sitting at about 6 minutes, so we got about 4 more minutes yet before we can pull that out of the cold water. We got about half a minute left here, guys. All righty. It should be pretty cold. It's looking pretty good. right, about 20 seconds. The solid should settle out. Hopefully it was cold enough. Let me just take a look. Yeah, I think it's good. I might let it sit for an extra minute. I think it just needs to get just a little colder, so extra minute or two. Sorry. Well, hopefully that's cold enough. I don't know about you guys, I'm ready to go in here. So there is our 125 milliliter Erlenmeyer flask. This is the filtrate. This should have the stuff we're looking for in there. It's dissolved in there. We're going to filter this. I always like to pour the stuff in first, see how much we can get, and then turn that thing on. Sometimes a bit messy, and then we will wash that water. It's a bit messy. That helps a little bit. There's going to be a little white down here. If there's too much, we may have to filter it again and try it. We'll see how that works. It might not look like there's much in there, but the particles are really tiny. They're just really tough to see. I like to rinse this out as always. We can see a lot of acetylsalicylic acid in here, so looks like we might have pretty decent success. Oh, sometimes this happens. Take a look at this. Okay, this is sort of a white. I'm going to change. I don't like that. To a different hose that has a little bit wider diameter, might prevent that vacuum block like that. Hopefully that is the case. Sometimes if you just turn the water on too high too, it'll do that. And you can see the higher you turn this water on, it locked up again on me. And I got to get a larger diameter tube here. Sorry about this, you guys. I think that's going to work. I don't know if I have two. I think I'll try this one. See how this one works. The wall of the tubing is a little thicker, so it's sort of better at resisting that little collapse like we saw in those last two. But it also means it's harder to get it on the little part you're trying to get it onto. Let's see if that works. That seems to be the it. There we go. All right, that's our last tip. You just got to give it a little bit of time to finish filtering. Oops, not too hard. I'm going to turn it down and we'll turn it back on. Okay. We have a lot of product here, and that's part of the reason it keeps collapsing, because there's quite a bit of solid in there, so it's getting harder and harder to suck that liquid through. So it's going pretty good now. The thing is, we want to let this sit here and run for a few minutes because it really helps dry our product out. And my tubing collapsed again, so once again, we'll stop this. Let's sort of reset itself before we go any farther. Just going to bring this up here for you. You can see what it looks like in there. We got quite a bit of stuff there, so it's working all right. Let's turn this back on again. Most of the liquid is out of there. Here's what I'm going to do. Sometimes this helps too. Take this off, pour this out, and just start it up over again. Then you can just tell if more liquid is coming out. So I think I'm going to let this run for about 3 minutes, and then we're going to take it back and go through. And what's neat about this is, if you guys have looked at the data table, it's asking you get a mass of both wet and dry acetylsalicylic acid. We're just going to get the dry because if I let this run long enough, it is going to dry it out. It won't be perfect. It'll be okay. Well, that's going. I'm going to get her a melting point after this. A little wet. We're going to let go. All right, I'm feeling like that's pretty good. Okay. Can hear that thing shutting down. It's sucked down there pretty tight. So there we go. And there's what our product looks like. Now what I'm going to do is transfer this to this weighing paper, which I've already teared, so I've gotten rid of the mass of it. And I'm hoping I don't lose any here. Sometimes you get, yeah, this likes to get into a little, almost like a wafer. And what I like to use is one of these little scoops here, spatulas, that helps you get this out of here. And if I'm real careful, I'll just go around the outside of this thing. I can peel this right up, and it's going to flop right out for us. Missed a tiny bit, but overall it came out pretty darn well. I'm pretty pleased with it. Awesome. So I'll put the funnel back at the top. Now I have to peel off the piece of paper. That can be tough sometimes because we're trying to not lose any of our product. And I'm just going around and scraping off the little bits of our ASA, acetylsalicylic acid. We want to get every little piece we can. It's still somewhat damp. It's not horrible. So there we go. We got that. Now I've pre-teared a piece of paper, so we're going to get our mass of aspirin here. Move this over. I got 1.10 grams. Okay, I'm going to call that the mass of the wet, even though we're not going to do the dry, because I'm not going to stick it in a drying oven to get it dry. So that's going to be the mass that we're going to use to do the rest of our calculations. Okay, now what we're going to do is deal with the melting point of this stuff. Okay, you're going to have to do some research on your own to look this up. Oh, by the way, there's a better picture of what our little blob of aspirin looks like, ASA. That's the stuff that actually helps with the aches and pains. Okay, so this is a very, very old melting point apparatus. Okay, what it basically is there's a little magnifying glass here. When it's plugged in, you can see a little light comes on there. You're going to put the little magnifying glass over that, and you're going to watch the crystals. And then what we do is we have a rough guesstimate of what the melting point is of this stuff. And I'm just going to set it at its maximum value. And what I do is watch through here until I see the first crystal melt and until the last crystal melts. That gives me a melting point range. And it's sort of tough to see, but right here is a thermometer that we can use. This thing is as old, well, it's older than me, so it's pretty old. Okay, I got to get the thermometer adjusted just a little for us so I can actually see what I'm looking for here. Yeah, come on here. There we go. So what I've got to do is put some of the aspirin in this little dish that's right here. So I'm going to shovel some of that stuff out of there. And I want it to be nice and flat, so it's easy to see. And this actually dried really nicely. I'm surprised how well. So there that is. Okay, so I'm going to pull the computer up here, let you guys see, so you can see what that looks like. So what I'm going to do is move this over, and I'm going to flip this on. Now this is already heating, and I don't know how well you guys are going to be able to see this, but I can see the crystals through there. So what I'm going to do here as this starts to heat up is watch those crystals for when they start to melt. I'm going to make a point when the first one starts to melt, and then when the last one melts. Nothing yet. This does take a little bit to heat up, so. Get it all the way up. Excuse me. Sometimes it can be hard to see the thermometer. It's starting to rise up. It's going to probably be a couple, 2-3 minutes yet. So once again, we had a couple values here. You guys can probably see this. We had 10 aspirin tablets. The total mass of the aspirin and the binder that we grinded up was 3.46 grams. Okay. The mass of this stuff that we just measured was 1.10 grams. We're going to skip the dry one. The temperature's starting to go up. No melt yet. There we go. It can be tough to see this thing, so sometimes I got to adjust it. Get around there. No, yeah, but I know we're not that far away here, so need to get this turned right. I won't let this one work like it. Yeah, you gotta put the cap on so it's up there nice and tight. Nothing yet, but it's getting there. Oh, it's getting warm, can smell it. Still waiting for melting, nothing yet. About 80 degrees here, it looks like. So we'll give it some time. I guess if you were 80 years old, you'd be slow at heating up too, huh? Starting to smell it now. Oop, started melting. And we're at about 120 degrees. It's all melted. And I'm going to say that's at 138. So our melting range was between 120 and 138 degrees Celsius. So we had 10 aspirin tablets, 3.46 grams. At the end of it, after everything's done, we got rid of the binder. We ended up with 1.10 grams of aspirin itself, acetylsalicylic acid, and we have our melting range there. So there you go. You go ahead and have this to fill out. Okay, that's what I'll expect you to do. Get a sheet like this and this. You can put it on Notability and go ahead and submit that as lab number 2. Hope that works for you. It'll work pretty well. Thank you very much. Lab 2 will be coming